Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're gonna follow one emotional day when Tuna wakes up missing Alex, fights through factory pressure and a looming wood shortage, and then waits through a long, silent evening call until his final words change everything. I'm on my way to you now, and I have a secret gift. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains and spread softly across the small house, laying pale gold over the floorboards, the table, and the cradle by the wall. Outside, the fields were still wet from night dew, and the air carried that clean countryside smell of damp soil and leaves warming under the first sun. Everything should have felt peaceful. For Tuna, it almost did. She woke with the last warmth of yesterday still resting in her chest. For a few quiet seconds, before the weight of the day could return, she stayed still and let herself feel it fully, the memory of Alex beside her, the sound of his voice, the way he had looked at little Henry, the way he had made her feel seen and safe without needing many words. Yesterday had been simple on the surface, but inside her it had moved like something much deeper. His love had not arrived loudly. It had settled into her, slow and certain, like water soaking into dry ground. A faint smile lingered on her lips as she reached for her phone on the bedside table. Her fingers moved quickly, almost shyly, as if the message itself were something warm she was handing to him. Alex, my love, I love you. Have you woken up yet? Eat breakfast? Henry and I miss you so much. She read it once, smiled again, and hit send. Then she waited. The screen stayed silent. Tuna stared at it for a second longer than she meant to, then told herself not to be foolish. He was probably busy. Maybe he was already at work. Maybe he had seen it and planned to reply in a minute. Maybe she let out a small breath and sat up fully. Beneath the sweetness of the morning, something thinner and sharper began to thread its way through her calm. Was he all right? She pushed the thought away before it could grow too large. There was no reason to feed worry this early. She slipped out of bed and crossed the room to Henry's crib. He was still asleep, one little hand curled near his face, cheeks round and flushed a soft pink. Tuna bent down and stroked his hair back gently. The sight of him steadied her immediately. "Mommy will take good care of you," she whispered, "and Daddy will come home." The word daddy still felt tender and new in her mouth, even when she said it only to a sleeping baby. The house was quiet in the most ordinary, beautiful way. Birds outside, the faint creak of bamboo in the breeze, Henry's soft breathing. Inside these walls lived a fragile but real happiness. Outside them waited work, decisions, pressure, distance, and all the things that made simple love feel more precious. Tuna looked at her phone again. Still nothing. This time she typed faster, shorter, less romantic, but somehow more revealing because of it. "Have you eaten yet?" She sent that one too, then set the phone down before she could keep staring at it. There were things to do. That, at least, she understood. A little later, Henry was awake, and the whole tone of the room changed. He opened his eyes slowly, squinting into the light, then broke into a bright grin the second he saw her leaning over him. Tuna laughed and lifted him carefully into her arms. "Good morning, my little one." She carried him to the wash basin and dabbed cool water over his face. Henry squealed and kicked, tiny hands waving, delighted by everything and nothing. Sunlight streamed through the window behind them, catching floating dust in the air and turning it into tiny drifting stars. "Where's the chicken, baby?" she asked, pointing to the picture on the wall. "Where's the chicken?" Henry made a happy noise and slapped the air with his hand as if that counted as an answer. Tuna kissed his cheek and sat him down so she could pull on his socks. "These are getting too small," she murmured. "Tomorrow, Mommy will buy you new slippers, okay?" Henry nodded in the vague, proud way babies do when they have no idea what they're agreeing to. She fed him porridge in slow spoonfuls, while he held onto the spoon like it was some important responsibility. The kitchen smelled of warm rice and chicken broth. Every few seconds he looked up at her with wide, sparkling eyes, And every time he did, something inside her softened. This, she thought, is why I keep going. And yet, even here, in this gentle, ordinary moment, Alex kept returning to her mind. She remembered him standing in this same kitchen, feeding Henry, speaking to him in that low, patient voice he used only with the baby. She remembered how natural he had looked doing it, as though he had always belonged in the frame of their lives. The longing came back in one quiet wave. Tuna reached for her phone again while Henry was still eating. Nothing. She tried not to let the disappointment show on her face. Henry didn't need her sadness in the middle of breakfast. So she tucked the phone aside, wiped his mouth, and held him close for a second longer than necessary. After this, she said softly, rocking him once, Mommy will take you to Grandma Tang's to play. Then Mommy will go to work and come back early to you. Henry leaned into her as if he understood every word. By the time she reached the office, the softness of morning had been replaced by the hard, dry smell of production. The factory air carried pine resin, dust, and the heat of machines already running. Tuna opened her laptop and began scanning Miss Trung's report, inventory levels, prepared veneer for export, remaining logs, enough raw material for just over 1 month. She stared at that number longer than she should have. It was not just a number. It was a warning. Her chest tightened. She picked up the phone immediately. Hello, Miss Trung? She said, voice steady but edged with urgency. Are you in the veneer drying area? I reviewed the plan. I want to meet in person and talk through everything. The drive to the factory yard felt hotter than usual. Wind rushed through the open window carrying kiln, heat, and dust. By the time she arrived, Miss Trung was already waiting near the stacked timber. They walked together between rows of wood, reviewing numbers, checking volume, going over delivery timelines. The veneer stacked in neat piles looked promising, smooth, clean, ready to move, but the figures underneath the visible order were much less comforting. If we sign more contracts now, Tuna asked, lowering her voice, do we actually have enough wood to support them? Miss Trung hesitated only briefly, but it was enough. That told Tuna everything. They both understood the danger. If they signed too quickly without securing supply, they would not just delay production, they would damage trust. And trust, once cracked, was harder to rebuild than inventory. The pressure landed on Tuna all at once. This was no longer only about orders and invoices. It was about workers who depended on the company, about promises already made, about Henry's future, about the life she was trying to build without letting it collapse under the weight of too many responsibilities at once. And yet, even inside that pressure, a thin line of hope remained. The previous imported wood batch had been good. Customers had been pleased. The quality had held. That meant there was still time if she moved carefully and fast. She took a breath and made the decision aloud. We prioritize new suppliers first, she said. No unnecessary risk. Stay here and oversee the workers. I'll contact the partners myself. She kept moving after that, crossing from the report area into the drying section, where wide veneer sheets lay under strong sun. Workers moved steadily between stacks, loading, checking, measuring. Tuna asked questions, counted loads, confirmed tomorrow's shipment. Everything on the surface looked stable, but underneath, her mind was already racing ahead. New sources, prices, distances, negotiation, quality, timing. And beneath all of that, quieter but still present, one other thought continued to pulse. Why hasn't Alex answered yet? Tuna moved between the drying racks and storage area with calm precision, but inside, her thoughts were anything but calm. The veneer sheets lay spread out under the harsh afternoon sun, gleaming pale and smooth, filling the yard with the fresh smell of cut wood and resin. Workers called to one another over the noise of loading trucks. Engines idled, forklifts backed up and turned. Everything around her suggested progress, but numbers had their own truth. She stopped beside one of the larger stacks and asked, "Is there enough here to fill that truck?" One of the workers wiped his forehead and pointed toward the lower warehouse. "More than enough. There's another load waiting down there too." Tuna nodded. On the outside, that answer was good, practical, reassuring. But the figure from the report still echoed behind everything she heard. Just over 1 month of logs left. That single fact followed her like a shadow. She found Miss Trung again near the loading area. "I read the report from a few days ago," Tuna said. "We need new supply sources urgently." Miss Trung agreed at once. They stood together for a few minutes in the sun, watching men lift and stack veneer into a waiting truck. The wood looked beautiful. That was the frustrating part. Orders were ready. Quality had improved. Customers had been happy after Tet. The business looked stable from a distance, but supply was the weak bone inside the body. Tuna folded her arms against the pressure tightening inside her chest and spoke in the even, measured tone she used when she needed the people around her to stay confident. "The weather is clear today," she said. "Keep drying everything you can. We move tomorrow's delivery on schedule." And workers continue as usual. Her instructions were simple, but every word was built on urgency. She kept walking after that, checking the sheets laid under the sun, pausing to inspect the edges of a particularly clean batch, asking another worker about moisture levels, confirming transport timing. To anyone watching, she would have looked composed, focused, in control. Only she knew how much effort that steadiness cost. The smell of fresh wood filled the yard. Somewhere above, a crow called from the trees. Sunlight poured down hard and white, flattening the shadows, making everything look sharper than it really was. Tuna lifted one veneer sheet slightly and felt the smoothness under her fingers. Good quality, good finish, good customer feedback. That memory helped. If the next plantation visit went well, maybe the future would widen again. She walked back toward the office, took out her phone, and finally saw something. A missed message notification. Her breath caught for the smallest second, but it wasn't from Alex. It was from a logistics contact confirming shipment timing. Useful, but not what her heart had been reaching toward all day. She stared at the blank space where his name still hadn't appeared, and a little wave of disappointment hit harder than she wanted to admit. He could still be busy, she told herself. And yet the silence had begun to gather weight. She didn't have time to sink into it, though. By early afternoon, she was already driving along a narrower red dirt road toward the plantation of Mr. Howe, the man Miss Trung had mentioned as a possible supplier. Dust rose behind her car in thick red clouds. The road was rough, uneven, lined with tall grasses and scattered trees. The farther she drove, the quieter it became. By the time she arrived, the air had changed completely. Mr. Howe greeted her at the edge of the plantation and led her deeper into the rows of straight-standing trees. The leaves moved softly overhead, making a sound like distant rain. There was a coolness there under the canopy that the factory never had, he explained as they walked. 70% already harvested. 3-year-old trees remaining in some sections, but those were suitable only for wood chips. Not veneer, not enough diameter, not enough consistency. Tuna crouched beside one trunk and ran her fingers over the bark, already calculating. Too young, too thin, too risky. They walked farther uphill until the plantation opened into a broader section. 50 hectares of older trees, around 5 years in age, taller, straighter, fuller through the trunk. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in shifting pieces, laying light and shadow across her face as she moved between rows, stopping now and then to study diameters more closely. "These trees are beautiful," she said at last, voice thoughtful. "But the sizes aren't consistent," Mr. Howe nodded. "Different soil conditions," he said. "Some parts grew better than others." Tuna stood still for a few seconds and looked out across the plantation. This could solve the next 6 months. It could also trap her in a bad contract if she rushed the decision. She felt the weight of the choice almost physically. this was not only about business anymore. It was about stability for the company, for the workers, for Henry, for the life she was trying to build with enough room in it for love and safety in ordinary evenings at home. She turned to Mr. Howe and said, "We should continue this over coffee. I need to discuss price and conditions properly." He agreed, and they began walking back down the slope. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from the climb, but from responsibility itself. When she reached her car, Tuna paused and looked back once over the rows of green. The plantation stood there in the late sun like both promise and challenge. If this worked, the fear of shortage could finally loosen. If it didn't, the next month would become a race. She drove home as the light began to lower. The sky turned deeper, redder, and the world outside the windows softened with dusk. For the first time all day, she felt how tired she really was. The kind of tiredness that settles behind the eyes and in the lower back and makes every thought a little slower. But underneath, it was one growing thread of anticipation. Alex. He still hadn't replied to her messages. By the time she reached the house, twilight had stained the walls in a deep reddish glow. The small home looked calm, waiting. Henry was at Grandma Tang's, and when Tuna picked him up, he came into her arms with that immediate, trusting warmth that made all the practical burdens of the day fall back for a moment. She carried him home, pressed her face into his hair once, then started dinner. The kitchen filled with the smell of porridge and chopped herbs. She moved quickly but gently, setting toys near Henry so he could sit beside her and play while she cooked. He laughed at the smallest things, his spoon, a rattling toy, the sound of her voice. "Play here, baby," she murmured. "Mommy's making dinner." She kept glancing at the clock. Still nothing from Alex. That unease from the morning, thin at first, had now become something she could feel in her body. Not fear exactly, just the ache of waiting too long for one familiar name to appear on a screen. She rocked Henry after dinner, singing softly until his eyelids grew heavy. Then, unable to hold back any longer, she reached for her phone and called Alex directly. The line rang once, then twice. Then his voice came through warm, familiar, instantly dissolving half the tension in her chest. "Hello?" Tuna closed her eyes briefly in relief. "Alex, are you done with work?" "I just finished," he said. "I'm on my way to you now." The smile came to her face before she could stop it. "You could have answered earlier. I kept waiting all day." "I know," he replied, and there was apology in the softness of his voice. "I had back-to-back meetings and terrible signal, but I have a secret gift for you, so forgive me?" Her heart lifted so suddenly, it almost felt childish. "A gift?" "Yes." "For what?" "You'll see when I get there." The line ended a minute later, but the house had already changed. It wasn't only the relief of finally hearing him, it was the promise hidden in his tone. The certainty that no matter how crowded the day had been with orders and numbers and wood supply pressure, he was still coming back to her. Tuna moved through the rest of the evening with new energy. She arranged the food more neatly on the table than she needed to. She fixed the blanket over Henry once more, even though he was already sleeping peacefully. She sat beside him afterward with the lamplight soft around her and listened for the sound she had been waiting for since dawn, the familiar engine in the yard. Outside, darkness settled over the fields. Inside, a small, warm flame of anticipation burned so steadily it made the whole house feel alive. Tuna wakes in the soft morning light, still carrying the warmth of yesterday's love, but Alex's silence quickly turns her happiness into quiet worry. After caring for little Henry and sending unanswered messages, she heads into a demanding workday at the factory, where a report reveals a dangerous shortage of raw logs, just over a month left. Determined to protect the company, workers, and Henry's future, she meets Miss Trung, inspects veneer production, and pushes operations forward while urgently searching for new wood suppliers. Her plantation visit with Mr. Howe offers hope, but also pressure, as quality and pricing must